We're all set.
Hey, welcome all to this session on viewing courses in Brightspace as a student. My name is Douglas Hemphill. I am one of the campus instructional designers, and I'm joined today by our other instructional designer, Carrie Mocyk. So basically, what we want to know today is how do we know what our students are seeing? And to facilitate that, I am going to share my screen. And by default, you will always enter your course as an instructor. And unfortunately, unlike our previous system, when you use the student preview tool, it does not turn you into a student. It just kind of gives you an overlay of what is visible to a student. So I'm actually going to start with a couple views that show you what a student sees in very specific circumstances that are not part of the student preview tool. To start with, I'm going to go into my course. And I am going to go into my gradebook. Now, of course, by default, I see all of my students, but if I click on a student name, or actually, I think I made a mistake. Pardon me. Sorry, if I click on the pull down next to a student name, I can click preview, and this shows me a pop-up of what that particular student sees. Are you able to see the pop-up, Carrie?
I'm
No,
not seeing a pop-up.
Okay, hang on. I have to change my Zoom settings. Now do you see the pop?
Yes.
Okay, so you will get a pop-up. This is what a student sees when they go into the grade view. So it's a simple way of saying, okay, this is what this student is seeing. However, just as a general rule, the grade view is not really the best way for students to understand how they are doing in a course or to access feedback, except at a very high level. So what we would usually encourage them to use, if I can get this to cooperate, is under course progress. If you click class progress, you will see a list of every student in the course, but if you click on their name, this now gives you the progress view for that individual student, which is the same screen that they see. So this lets me see exactly what that student is seeing, what and more importantly, what feedback they are seeing. Unfortunately, I don't have any feedback. I must have accidentally cleared it in one of my cleaning attempts. But this would let me do something like look at quizzes and make sure that students are getting the feedback on a quiz that I want them to see. The last thing I'll show you is if you use the student preview tool and go into a quiz, you will not see the option to start that quiz. If I want to see what a quiz looks like to a student, I need to go to the quiz aggregator. Again, I'm still in instructor view. I go to course tools, I go to quizzes, and then on whatever quiz I want to look at, I use the pull down menu and I say preview. And this will now pull me into what a student sees. So when a student clicks on this quiz, and it's accessed, this is the first thing they will see. And if you actually click the start quiz button, it will pull you into the quiz itself. So again, this is how you see what a student sees for a quiz. So those are some specific examples. But most commonly, what we use the preview tool for is to make sure what is visible to students. So as an instructor, obviously, we see everything. And I'm just going to add a date restriction to this real quick so that I can show off something else as well. So in this case, now I am going to go up to the top and click on my name, and I will see an option to view as OSW student. And I'm going to click that, and it's going to kick me back to the front of the course. Now, one thing I want you to notice is that in the table of contents view, the module that I just put a date release on has disappeared. However, if I go into content, I'll see that I can see that module, but it's telling me it does not start until January 19th. So just be aware that is one difference in your view, that you will always see everything in the visual table of contents, but if something is hidden, it will fall off the visual table of contents for students, but they will be able to see it on the sidebar. Now, this is based on the default visibility settings, which allow students to see things but not access them until the date that they are visible. So, for example, I'm clicking on Module 1. I can see everything that's going to be in Module 1, but I can't actually use any of these links. And it will tell me, yeah, you're not going to be able to access any of this till January 19th. So again, this basically gives you an idea of what students can see and what they can access. And if you don't want students to see something, period, I'm going to turn off my student view just by clicking my name again and clicking the X. So I'm back as an instructor. And I would simply go find the eyeball. So I'm in module 1, and I'm just going to find this eyeball up here. I'm going to click it, and I'm going to hide it completely. Now, at this point, students don't see it at all. They don't get that preview view I just showed. They get nothing, to quote a certain chocolate factory owner. So that is really the nuts and bolts of the student preview tool. So are there any questions at this point? Okay, so one other thing that I wanted to show off is if you go into course tools and course admin, you have this option for availability date defaults. Now, first thing to be aware of is this does not affect any existing dates. This is only if you are creating new dates or adding new dates to things. But what this lets you do is for each type of item, change how you want students to be able to view it. So by default, it's always going to be what I just showed you, where I can see it, but I can't go into it. But for example, for assignments, I can make it so they can go in and read the assignment instructions, but they can't submit it. Or I can make it so that it is completely not visible to them. And I can do the same thing for discussions. Content doesn't really work this way. So it's purely assignments and discussions, but it's a neat tool to sort of tweak how students are seeing your course. But again, this does not affect existing courses. It only affects, or sorry, does not affect existing dates. It only affects dates that are newly created. If you want to change things with existing dates, the easiest option is probably to use the manage dates function and just go into the individual dates. It will let me. There we go. Sorry, I have to find one that actually. Sorry, that availability tool is a new thing, so apparently it's not giving the option within the date manager. I know it does for discussions, unless they change something on me. So always the fun thing about doing live workshops is that occasionally Brightspace will slip in changes and you don't really know about it until you run into it. Okay, so see, in the discussion editor, I have the ability to change those settings on the fly. Apparently, they just haven't integrated the ability to do that through the date manager for assignments yet. I would presume, though, that you can do it at the actual assignment level, but let's check. So yeah, if you have a date on an assignment, you can control those visibility settings right underneath the assignment. So I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, but are there any questions?
So Doug, I have my practice course up and we were talking in the last session about impersonating a student. I have a lot of stuff in there if you want me to show that or if you want to jump into that.
It's really your call. If you think there's something valuable you can show there, go for it. What we have is as system admins, we have a couple of practice accounts that are actual students that we can pretend to be, but unfortunately that's not a tool for the rest of the campus because the practice students screw up things like starfish and are just problematic to be in anything other than a practice course.
Yeah.
But it's really your call if you think there's something that you want to show off.
If anyone would like to see it, I don't mind sharing it.
Go for it.
Rebecca has a question.
Yes. Kathi is actually the master of the Pulse app. So I know, yeah, submodules are just an issue in general. And what Rebecca's talking about is yeah, screen is too small and I have too many things going on. Is that in content, you can create what I'd call a master module on the left-hand side just by adding a module. Then once you're inside a module, you can add submodules right at the bottom just by clicking add submodule. However, if you add too many submodules, things start getting a little wonky. Generally speaking, our recommendation is to keep it to one primary module and one secondary module. And also you want to try to have your content grouped together. So you'd have all your material in your submodule, then stuff that's outside your submodule or vice versa. And the reason for that is when students navigate these things, what they will usually do is click on the first item And instead of going, oh, and of course it's a checklist, and checklists work different. See if I can try this again. Or accidentally click on the same thing. Try this on different modules. So what students will usually do. Carrie, do you have any idea why I'm not seeing my next buttons?
In as a student?
Am I?
No.
Oh, but I mean, even if I
Yeah, they should
should
be
be
there.
seeing them no matter what, and I don't know why I'm not. I is confused. So normally what happens is that when I click on any item, I see that item, but I have a little option at the top to go to the next item. And I am not sure why that is missing from my view. Okay, I apologize. I am very confused.
Actually, Doug, I don't see it in there's, yeah, we'd need to look into that.
Carrie, do you know anything about the ally tools?
I mean, I'm seeing the alternative formats as I am in as a student. But
Because Rebecca's referencing student ally tools, and I only know about the faculty side of the ally tools.
and I'm looking through to see, like I can, if you stop sharing your screen, I can share my screen.
You should have the ability.
Okay. All right, so I am in as a student right now and going into content. I get into my module 1 demo.
So I think what Rebecca's asking is whether or not you can preview these alternate formats from the instructor preview tool, not when you're in person
Oh,
student.
okay.
So just stop impersonating the student and then use regular preview and see what pops up.
Okay.
No, absolutely. It's a perfectly valid question. I just don't happen to know the answer off the top of my head. And Carrie's kind of our instructional design accessibility guru, so that's why I'm throwing it to her.
Well, I don't know what.
So yeah, you can. So if you you see it right there. You didn't even have to do the student preview. You can see it from the regular faculty view.
All right, I missed what we're.
So just go into content. And then see it's right there next to the tag bar.
Yeah, so I see it from the faculty side, but
Yeah, but it's the A, because what Rebecca was asking about was whether or not you can check out the alternate formats. And so the answer is yes, and you don't even have to go into student preview. They're available through your regular instructor view. As far as I know, it should be exactly the same thing. because it's run through a third-party generation via Ally. And I do remember comparing them at one point of view because I was asked to check that it was working properly, and they looked exactly the same to me. All right, well, that is all the time that we have. Thank you all. As always, if you have any further questions, feel free to drop into our office hours or to just drop a line to help@oswego.edu. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.